Hello, everyone. My name is Sophie Theis, and I'm a Senior Research Analyst at the International Food Policy Research Institute. In this presentation, I'm going to discuss how irrigation engineers and policymakers can develop and promote small-scale irrigation technology that works for women. I'll discuss why women currently do not have equal ability to adopt irrigation technology, why this is a problem, and how we can change this. I'll be focusing on small-scale water lifting and application technologies such as motor, solar, treadle pumps, and drip kits. For this, I am drawing on experience gained in the Feed the Future Innovation Laboratory for Small-Scale Irrigation, supported by USAID, as well as through the REACH program supported by DFID. Links to papers that describe gender and irrigation in more detail are provided on the final slide of this presentation. To begin with, why is small-scale irrigation not working for women? All available studies have found a gender gap in the adoption and use of irrigation technologies in developing countries. This means two things. First, men are more likely than women to practice irrigation. And second, among those who do irrigate, men are more likely to use mechanized technologies to lift and apply water, such as the diesel pump shown in the above picture on the left, while women are more likely to use labor-intensive manual methods, such as buckets, shown in the picture on the right. This gender gap in the use of irrigation reflects the reality that women do not have the same opportunity to adopt and benefit from irrigation technology as men do. Let's look now at why this gender gap in irrigation matters. Why do women need irrigation technologies? Well, think about all of the benefits of irrigation. Women are also farmers, and in fact, they make up about 43% of the on-farm labor force in developing countries. They need irrigation for the same reasons men do. And in addition, they shoulder a larger overall labor burden than men do because of their many unpaid household responsibilities: cooking, cleaning, caring for children, collecting fuel and water. Thus, women need irrigation technologies to improve their own agricultural production, reduce their drudgery, save time, produce nutritious food in the dry season. More specifically, irrigation technologies can support women farmers in the following ways. They can help them generate income through higher value produce, higher yields, and an extended growing season. They can grow more nutritious crops, withstand weather variability and climate stresses, access water supply for multiple purposes in addition to crops, think drinking water, cleaning, water for livestock, and so on, improve family health, and reduce the burden that falls on women of caring for the sick, and reduce women's own time and energy burden of collecting and applying water. And which kinds of women are we talking about here? Women farmers have different needs that vary by context and by other aspects of identity, such as education, wealth, class, ethnicity, land ownership status, and so on. In addition, two important categories we need to distinguish between are women in female-headed households and women in male-headed households. These two groups face different challenges and opportunities, and as a result, different strategies for reaching them with irrigation technologies are required. Female heads of household have no spouse or adult male living with them. They might be widows, divorced women, unmarried women. This group is often marginalized and has less access to resources and to labor. However, compared to women in male-headed households, they may have more decision-making power and mobility, so it might be less difficult for them to decide to adopt irrigation technology, but more difficult to afford the technology or find labor to apply it. In contrast, women in male-headed households may have more access to resources and to labor, but less decision-making power and autonomy than female heads of household. Often, we think in terms of the household unit, but decades of research have demonstrated that household members do not share all resources and income equally. This means that if a male-headed household adopts irrigation, the wife in the household does not necessarily see the same benefits as her husband. For example, if she provides labor for irrigation, but has no say over how the income generated is spent. And women's control over income matters for gender equity, and also because research shows that when women have control over income, they spend more on children's health and education. So when we talk about reaching and benefiting women with irrigation technologies, we need to be aware of how strategies may need to be tailored for different kinds of women in the specific context where we are working. In addition, it is important to note that comparing female heads of household versus male heads of household is not adequate because this leaves out the majority of women who live in male-headed households. So we also need to look at dynamics within male-headed households. Given what we've discussed thus far about why women need irrigation technologies and how women have different needs depending on their identity and the household in which they live, what can we say about why there is a gender gap in the adoption of irrigation technologies? In the next part of this presentation, we'll discuss how women face specific barriers to adopting irrigation technology. Now, men also face barriers, but women often face more barriers and different kinds of barriers than men do. And by virtue of being born male or female, men and women are treated differently, have different opportunities, and face different social expectations about what they can and cannot do. And the reason we do this research and give presentations like this one is to advance our understanding of what these gender-based barriers are so that we can remove them and give women an equal chance to adopt these important technologies. And there are specific actions which we'll talk about that irrigation engineers and policymakers can take to contribute to this goal. Now, let's break for a quick discussion. Please stop the PowerPoint for 10 minutes and discuss part 1 and part 2 of this slide. Based on what we've discussed so far, what factors do you think make it difficult for women to adopt irrigation technology, and how might these factors differ for women in male-headed versus female households? So, why is it harder for women than men to adopt irrigation technology? To begin with, one common mistake is to focus only on the act of technology adoption, say buying irrigation equipment. That single moment of purchasing or acquiring a technology, however, exists within a whole process of technology development, dissemination, and use. When women are left behind, it might be at any point along this whole process, not just at the point of purchasing a technology. In addition, we want to know what happens after technology, how adopting new technology affects men and women's well-being, say 1 year after the purchase of a new technology. So if we consider a process that includes technology design, dissemination, adoption, and use, this helps us see more clearly where women might be left out and where there are opportunities to include women. So for each stage, we can ask the following questions. starting with the design phase on the left-hand side, we can ask, do existing technologies meet women's needs? And what are women's needs and preferences around the design of an irrigation technology? In the phase of disseminating or marketing the technology, what barriers do women face in learning about the technology? And how do these differ from men? To adopt the technology, what barriers do women face compared to men? And then after the technology has been adopted and is being used, how does it impact men and women differently? Who benefits and who bears the costs? So let's look at how each phase here can better serve women, starting with the design phase. And we're motivated to understand women's specific preferences as users of irrigation equipment so that they actually become customers and want to adopt the technology. What are some of women's unique needs and preferences regarding the design of the technology? Well, these are going to be context specific, but technology designers and policymakers can ask, where, when, and for what purposes do women want irrigation and water technologies? Some issues to investigate include whether women want to use the technology for multiple uses, like irrigating crops, domestic uses, livestock watering. For this, the location or portability of the technology may matter. In addition, what is women's willingness to pay for the technology to acquire it and to operate it? How much operational costs and what type of costs are women willing to take on, including the cost of fuel and maintenance, and the human energy to operate the technology that may be needed? Policymakers should also consider women's preferences around financing options, including whether women prefer to purchase or to rent a technology individually or jointly with a husband or with a group. And they can assist in making financing options available through subsidies or special credit lines for women. Finally, design should also consider whether women feel comfortable given their social context and norms operating certain technologies. As an example, in the Innovation Lab for Small-Scale Irrigation, or ILSI, research in Ethiopia, women expressed preference for technologies that are labor-saving, allow women to use water for multiple purposes, function during multiple seasons, and are installed near the home so that they are suitable for home gardens. These are all considerations to explore in the specific setting where you are working to design appropriate technologies with and for women. So, once technology is designed that meets women's needs, we need to make sure information about the technology reaches women. So let's look at the phase of dissemination. Note that traditional ways of reaching farmers with extension don't necessarily include women. For example, women may not have permission to attend or feel comfortable participating in farmer field schools, trainings and demonstrations, or producer groups, especially if it's mostly men that are attending and facilitating. If producer groups, cell phones, or extension agents are used to disseminate information about a new technology, women may very likely not receive the information as they're often not members of male-dominated producer groups, are less likely to own cell phones, and are less likely to interact with extension officers or irrigation equipment dealers. However, we can meet women where they are, and if we recognize that these channels are not reaching women, we can either adjust these channels or use new channels that tap into women's specific networks, such as women's savings groups, frontline health workers, or recruiting women lead farmers. For any channel of disseminating information, we do need to make sure women trust the information provider and feel comfortable asking questions so that they can make an informed decision about adopting the technology. Next, let's look at gender considerations in the moment of adopting technology. So we'll look at what barriers do women face compared to men in adopting the technology, and what resources do they need in order to purchase it. Most of the time when we're talking about technology adoption, it is through the purchase of irrigation equipment, although sometimes people will receive it through a project or will rent it out. But let's say someone wants to buy irrigation technology. In addition to being able to afford it, what other resources does this person need? Research in Kenya found that men are more likely to buy irrigation pumps with loans, and that women who bought pumps did so with cash. In many contexts, this reflects that access to credit is much more challenging for women than men. Women often need the consent of their husband to take out credit and can struggle with know your customer requirements such as providing identification, credit history, or collateral to receive credit. In addition, adopters of irrigation need to have access to complementary resources such as access to irrigable land, water, and labor to practice irrigation. And women are often strongly disadvantaged on these factors. Land ownership or drilling wells can be prohibitively expensive, and other options like joining a water user association and negotiating for water rights might not be open to women due to social norms of these organizations. Furthermore, women in male-headed households, as we discussed earlier, need to have the power within their family to make the purchase and may need the consent and support of her husband. Finally, irrigated agricultural production needs to be sufficiently profitable to pay back any credit that is taken out, keeping in mind that for more expensive equipment like motor pumps or solar pumps, the payback period is often greater than a single season, and repayment terms need to allow for this time. Finally, let's look at what happens after technology adoption, when a technology is being used. How are men and women affected differently? And do women actually benefit from the technology that they adopt? First, men and women, even within the same household, may experience different costs and benefits associated with a new technology. For example, we can study how the workload changes around irrigation, considering all the tasks of irrigating and cultivating irrigated produce around the year. We can examine who within the household has the power to decide how the technology is used and on whose plots of land, and who controls the income generated. At the community level, some instances of technology adoption can cause wage laborers to lose employment. In other cases, women and other less powerful actors can lose their rights to water and to land. So we also need to look at how are different groups of people within a community affected differently by technology adoption. In addition, if we want to support women in truly benefiting from technology, we need to help make it a profitable venture. The irrigator needs market access to buy inputs and sell the product, business skills, and access to agricultural information and financial services. However, we also need to ask the question, profitable for whom? Do women have any control over the income that is generated by irrigation? From our research under IFPRI in Tanzania, 2 women here describe how they labored with their husband cultivating irrigated produce over the year, but at the end of the day, their husbands ended up selling the rice that they produced at a local warehouse. The women say, "On ownership, it's father, my husband, because he signs the sacks at the warehouse and even sells, but you won't even know of the amounts. Whether he gives you a fake calculation, you just have to accept." Another woman says, "You can't go daily to check them, the sacks, since you aren't the one who signed for it inside there, because his fellow men will think of me oppositely, so I just remain at home." This raises the point that if we want irrigation technology to benefit women, we need to be aware of risks such as loss of control over income. So, some of the risks to keep in mind are that women do not necessarily have access to and control over the profits of irrigated production, although there are things that can be done to increase their chance of sharing in the control of these profits with their husband. Transferring technologies to women also does not guarantee their control. If men in the household are not supportive, they will take control of it instead. And so, as an example, in a case study in Ghana, pumps were distributed to women, but most respondents, both men and women, responded to the question of ownership that men were the owners of the pump, although the project gave pumps to women. In addition, we need to be careful that irrigation technology introduced does not increase women's time burden excessively. Finally, more powerful actors within the family or outside it can appropriate land, income streams, or water sources from women after they make investments in irrigation that may make their land or their produce more valuable. Thus, efforts to help women secure their land and water tenure and defend their rights to these resources are needed to ensure benefits after technology adoption to women. So, what can irrigation engineers and policymakers do to ensure that women have equal chance to benefit from irrigation? Here are several ideas. They can design technology with women that meets their needs, studying women's priorities and preferences. They can ensure marketing, dissemination, extension approaches actually reach women so that women learn about the irrigation technology and how it is used. They can support women's ability to purchase technology through access to financing, appropriate subsidies, and groups. They can help secure women's access to and control over irrigable land and water for irrigation. And, quite importantly, they can monitor and evaluate gender-related outcomes after technology adoption, both within the household and within the community, to understand if women are reached, benefited, and empowered by the technology. Thank you very much for your time. I'll leave you here with several discussion questions on the next slide and welcome you to reach out to me via this email address here if you have any questions or comments.